Do you guys have any idea what this is like to have to live through 2007 2.0 and to have to actually try and predict this every week? You think I do this because it's easy? No, I do this because it's hard. Yeah, we got a new set, by the way. I'll talk about that. I do this because it's hard. It's very difficult. You have to expose yourself, figuratively, of course, and then you just have to bear the brunt of it. I've got to own some things tonight, and then I just have to merely admit some things tonight. A lot of you sick, twisted, sadistic people out there are tuned in specifically for that. And you know what? I'm going to give you what you came over here for. We are jam-packed. We are high atop a discombobulated downtown Nashville, Tennessee on this Sunday night, November 24th, the year of our Lord 2024, proudly brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. You think I'm in bad shape. You should see the SEC tonight. Is anyone left standing? Texas, maybe? Georgia? You guys were just fortunate enough to be playing a high school team yesterday, so congrats. The conference is in a little state of flux, as Meemaw would say. Officiating is not in a state of flux. It's never good. It's just bad. It's just terrible. I will talk to you about that. I will talk to you about what can only be described at this point as sort of an impending college football playoff earthquake. I will talk to you in great detail about my visit to Tempe, Arizona yesterday. I got full Week 13 reaction. We're wall-to-wall tonight. We're being watched in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're being watched in Bisbee, Arizona, Tampa, Florida, Knoxville, Tennessee. And how about it now? I promised you guys 4 or 5 years ago, I promised you that we were going to get a new set, and we got a new set. Look around. We just moved in. 20 minutes ago, we just moved in. And we got a congratulatory text from management. Colin is telling me in my ear. Yeah, so management texted me earlier today. I'll read it for you if you're listening on podcast. It's dripping with management vibes. I can't wait for you to do tonight's show when you give credit to the fans and ignore the fact that I've spent hundreds of hours on meetings and calls fighting for, designing, and installing this. Should be fun. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank you guys, because you guys are 110% fully responsible for us having these posh new digs here. I do have a request, because unlike management, we don't just have equestrian trophies from our childhood to put all over the place. So I don't like decorating things. You guys can feel free to send in whatever it is you think should be on these shelves. I intentionally left them bare so that you can design this new place for us. We're still figuring out lighting and blocking and a bunch of other boring stuff. Low key, though, management did pull this off for us. So we do appreciate him. We do appreciate him. Christmas card coming this year. Okay, much more pressing matters at hand than where we are is what we saw yesterday. You witnessed it. I witnessed it. And we got to talk about it. How do I go anywhere else other than what went down in Norman, Oklahoma last night? I was in Tempe, Arizona yesterday afternoon. I'm talking to Dusty Dvorak, longtime Sooner great, and we're talking about everything other than Alabama, Oklahoma. And then a few hours later, we're flying home, and Alabama's going down. And I'm watching it, as I tend to always do these Alabama upsets from 36,000 feet. I don't know what it is about this string of me watching Bama lose while I'm flying. 24-3, the final here. Oklahoma did it, man. Two Chali. I gave it 2 Chali on the rating scale. If that means anything to you, I got to be real with you for a second. Bipolar disease is very serious. I don't have any friends who are bipolar. I've never dealt with that firsthand. I don't have family members who are bipolar, but man, I've watched Alabama football. So I kind of get a sense of what it's like. That team is impossible to predict because it is so quarterback-centric. It is so dependent on which version of number 4 shows up. But it's not even a home and road thing. You would think, oh, they're just bad on the road. They're good at home. No, man. They ripped LSU spine out in Death Valley a few weeks ago. I know. I was there. But we don't talk about the losers first on this show. We talk about the winners. And Jackson Arnold in Oklahoma showed up yesterday and said, we may not have a record to write home about, but the whole point of this thing is to score points, right? By any means necessary. So as an offense, as it turns out, they didn't need to do anything. The defense was going to outscore Alabama on its own. But as an offense, we don't know that going into a game. So we want to move the ball. How do we move the ball down the field? Could be through the air. If you're a quarterback, you would love to do it that way. But I'll tell you, you could also just pass for 68 yards and still win comfortably. And the way you do that is to just put the passing game on hold for a night. If you can run the ball to the tune of, I don't know, 250 yards against Alabama, then do it. By all means, do it. Jackson Arnold himself had 131 on the ground, and there was no answer. Alabama has no answer. And then you watch it start, and like me, you're probably sitting there thinking, all right, bad first half, but let's see, how many points will they need to win? I always play that game in my head when a favorite is down. I was doing it with Ole Miss yesterday. When a favorite is down early, how many points do I think they're going to need to come back and win this game? Well, that talking point quickly dissipated in my mind. I'll talk about this later because it really wraps into this whole SEC mushroom cloud that appeared over the entire conference yesterday. But to watch Oklahoma, to think about the talk that's been around Brent Venables at various points this year, the offense has been terrible. They fired the offensive coordinator. It just, again, it goes to show you, I probably need to practice a little better discipline on this. You just have to wait to the end of the season to judge these guys. You can get so caught up in the week to week, even the half to half. If you're hanging out on message boards, there are a million and one things moving behind the scenes. And Oklahoma, I don't know. I heard some people calling it a signature win, a program-defining win. I think Alabama's getting a lot of grace for what Nick Saban did there and not so much acknowledgement that this year's team's just not elite by any stretch of the imagination. I know it means a lot to beat that brand, but, a few teams have done it already this year. I don't want to take anything away from Oklahoma. I'm just saying it was a very good win. It was a much-needed win. They secure their bowl trip, so they've got that streak still going for them. But on the other side, what do you make of Alabama? Big question around the old water cooler today. What do you make of Alabama? Jalen Milroe's the entire picture for that team this year. As he goes, they go. I think most folks who watch Alabama have realized that. And the Georgia and LSU and Wisconsin versions of him were really good. But we also live in a world where the Tennessee version showed up, and the Vanderbilt version showed up, and the Oklahoma version showed up last night. Do you realize, paper popper of a stat here, do you realize in Alabama's 3 losses, Milroe has 28 rushing yards? Not average, combined. He has 28 rushing yards in those 3 losses. We had to double check that. I thought it was a typo. I thought producer Jesse was lying to me, and he wasn't. Running backs, again, nothing to write home about. 15 carries, 63 yards. It's just the identity you think that team should have. The identity I think that team should have. For whatever reason, it does not have it consistently enough. There will be games like LSU that fool you into thinking they've turned a corner. And because it's Alabama, they still get benefit of the doubt in your mind, but they're bipolar. It is a bipolar football team. And they could lose to Auburn by 20 this coming Saturday. They could beat Auburn by 20 Saturday, and I'd look at either result and go, that tracks. Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of making sense, a lot of talk turned up again on Kalen DeBoer and the whole year one experiment and what will Alabama be long-term under Kalen DeBoer. So I'm on record and still am on record as saying I think he'll be a winner there for a long time. But a lot of people either disagree with that or they don't share my enthusiasm in that vein. Because there are a lot of stats floating around today about how Alabama's already done multiple times this year, what they only did a few times in the entirety of Nick Saban's career and all that. I think from 50,000 feet, that makes sense. From 50,000 feet, if you look at the way Saban exited, it was a little bit later in the cycle, and then you had to go get a guy, and he had to fill out his staff, and then his OC and his offensive line coach left after he hired them, so then he had to backfill for those positions. The portal cost them guys like Caleb Downs. They had to basically hold it together as best they could. It stands to reason from 50,000 feet that a guy like that may incur some bumps in the road, right? But that's not how we watch this game. It's not how we observe this game. It's not how I observe the game. So then you get sucked in, really good vibes, and then they turn in some performances that give you a little bit of confidence. But all the while, it feels like there's a little something missing. Now, you've been conditioned to watch Nick Saban's Alabama. And so you feel a little something's missing. But I also felt like that thing was missing from the last few Nick Saban teams. So it's not strictly a DeBoer thing. Like I thought the raw, animalistic killer instinct that program exemplified for the better part of 15 years started to wane a little bit. Still the most talented team in the country towards the end of Saban's run. Still right there in the college football playoff mix and in the national title mix. They won the SEC his last year there. The program didn't fall off, but relative to the standard they had set, I didn't feel like the killer instinct was there the last few years. They were a lot more penalty prone, just self-inflicted stuff, wild swings in performance, defensive lapses. Those things crept in a little bit towards the end of Nick Saban's tenure. So that's just the kind of stuff that's had the volume turned up on it a little bit in year one under Kalen DeBoer. That dude knows how to win. The same stuff wins that has always won. There's a coach that's pretty legendary in his own right that used to roam the sidelines at Alabama that is famous for saying stuff like that. He said it in the 70s. It's still true in the 2020s. You got to trust that you know what you're doing. And you probably don't get hired at Alabama, at least in the modern day, if you don't know what you're doing as head coach. So Kalen DeBoer is going to have 1,000,001 people throw ideas and suggestions at him. I am not suggesting he's running Alabama perfectly, and I actually, to the contrary, do expect there to be some staff churn there, but you could have called that shot in the spring. How many coaches do you see take over any program, and especially in a situation like him where you have to hastily throw everything together and then they just nail everything? Hardly anyone does that, and that's generically speaking. So specifically to Alabama and Kalen DeBoer, yeah, sure, he'll have to make changes. What I wonder is when I watch them, like Tyler Booker's the kind of player that if I multiplied his attitude, then you got the kind of killer instinct as a team I'm talking about. It's not to question anyone's competitiveness. I actually don't think they've mailed in the season at all. They look like they play hard. It's just so wildly inconsistent, and it's an intangible thing. There is nothing on paper that I can show you. I cannot quantify what I'm talking about, but everyone who's been around it or has watched it understands when a team has it. Most of them don't. Most of them don't ever get to that level, but there is an intangible, there's an it, there is a killer instinct. When you have it, it really stands out. And when you have it, stuff like last night doesn't happen. All due respect to Oklahoma, stuff like that doesn't happen. But this is not a vintage Alabama team. It's a good Alabama team, but a very bipolar and flawed Alabama team. And so you either finish with, what do they got? 3 losses now, Jesse, right? So they either finish 9-3 or 8-4 if they lose the Iron Bowl, which is its own set of issues if they do that. It's just, I think 2 years from now, wherever they are, they'll probably look back and whether they make the playoff or in all likelihood miss the playoff, I would lean towards miss, obviously. They probably find themselves saying, in retrospect, I'm glad this happened or that happened. It sucks to go through it in the meantime. I know, guys, it sucks. Got a lot of you watching, by the way. I appreciate it, coming to take your medicine. Make sure you subscribe to the channel while you're here because that is how we keep the show free. That's what we do. That's all we do. College football all year round. And nothing else. Candidly, probably won't talk about the NBA Finals on this channel. But spring football, you're in the right place. Just subscribe to the channel so we can keep it free. Academy Sports and Outdoors makes the show free as well. And is it okay, Colin? You think it's okay if I just throw these papers now? Yeah. You can't see them, can you? Academy Sports and Outdoors, I'm not going to go as far as to say they built the studio, but they certainly made it possible for us to build the studio. And Academy's been with us from the beginning. If you don't know the backstory, when we came here, and by here I mean CBS. We came here and we just wanted to go about it a little different way. We didn't want to take the standard, commercialized partnerships. We wanted people who watched the show, and we wanted brands that made sense and it aligned with our audience. So most people, a vast majority of you guys listening to this show, you either go to Academy already if you live in the areas where they are, or you can go to academy.com if you don't. But you live the kind of life that heavily overlaps with the kind of product they carry in their stores, if that makes sense. And then above and beyond that, they've been more than gracious with handouts and giveaways, I think is the term they want to use on the show. They're us. They're us. It's the best compliment I could give them. They wouldn't be aligned and associated with this show if they weren't. So we appreciate Academy immensely. They make a whole lot possible, including really some things that I don't talk about on air, but I'm very, very thankful for. Okay, it happened yesterday. Indiana finally suffered their first loss, 1.5 on the Chalice rating. I don't really think this was overly entertaining for the rest of the country, but boy, for Ohio State fans, it was great. They got me. They got me. Who is they, Josh? Well, you know who it is. Most of you are here to watch me have to wallow in this. But you know me. If I whiff on one, I can't run from it. I mean, it's out there in front of God and everyone. Many people screenshot it, so I can't run from it. Here's how this game started. Colin, in fact, go ahead and throw up the tweet so we can just talk over it. So if you were watching the game yesterday, Ohio State goes 3 and out to start this game. Okay, and then Indiana, 11 plays, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Ohio State's defensive line doesn't get a whole lot of pressure on the opening drive. They have multiple PIs called on them. And I go and do the one thing Meemaw told me never to do, and that is tweet during a game. And I did it. And I said the pucker meter must be rising quickly in Columbus. I think most of you understand what the pucker meter represents. And a lot of you came back at me like Brady there and said, man, it's the first quarter. Calm down. CYT. And I said, Brady, you think that defensive line and those corners are going to radically improve during quarters 2 through 4? Friends, 5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss. Indiana had 81 yards on 48 plays the rest of the game. This is a bad early afternoon for me. Very bad. I would like to take this opportunity to apologize to Jim Knowles, to Ryan Day, to many Ohio State fans that I sparred with on the internet. I learned my lesson. I have to learn this lesson about once or twice per season. I'm not proud of it. I'm not happy about it, but it is what it is. In the interim, if that makes you feel bad, just know, could have been a whole lot worse. You know, as bad as Ohio State owned this game, 38-15, they had 2 more red zone trips with no points. So it was already a slight splattering. It could have been a full-blown splattering. It could have been a full-blown body bagging. Indiana had negative yardage on 4 different drives in this game. I told you 5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss. We said Tuesday, Ohio State should be able to turn this into a roster game. And that just means our guys are better than your guys, and it doesn't really matter what you do. As long as we aren't asleep at the wheel, we ought to beat you out of sheer superior athleticism. That's what they did. That's what they did. These sorts of games where you have an underdog, but one that looks perfect, their resume is unblemished, but they're going up against an elite roster, it's all about show me. It's a show me moment, and the show me moments in this sport are all about the freeze point, which I also described in great detail Tuesday. Indiana did not meet the freeze point. There is never a situation, as it turns out now that we've seen the game, where if Indiana played Ohio State, they would meet the freeze point. The freeze point is just the minimum required level you're capable of playing at to overcome the gulf of an advantage they have over you roster-wise. There's only been one team that's really moved the ball offensively against Ohio State this entire year. I mean, consistently moved it against them, and that's Oregon. Oregon's the only team on Ohio State's schedule so far that has met that freeze point, that has shown the ability that even when Ohio State's doing what they want to do, we can still do our stuff against them. We can still run our offense against them. We can run the ball. We can throw the ball. We can maintain balance. No one else has been able to do that. That's not surprising because Ohio State should absolutely be the best defense in the country, and if not the, then one of the very best in the country. It's just that sometimes you got to go prove it. And they emphatically proved it again yesterday. The consistency was there. Everyone who should show up showed up. And like I said, out of that first and last drive Indiana had in the middle of it, they did nothing all day. So they got me because I remember in the Oregon game for Ohio State, I remember thinking as I was standing on the field, wow, this defensive line's they're not taking over this game, actually the other way around. I was very disappointed in how ineffective Ohio State's defensive front was in that game of making their presence felt. And I also know that at times this year, folks have had success targeting Ohio State corners. So when Indiana was able to show both of those, advantage Indiana on the first drive, it fooled me. It fooled me. I don't know what else to tell you. I hate it, but it fooled me. So then I got painted as a negative, a nega Hoosier last week. You know, I'm an Indiana hater. Why? Well, because I had the good sense to say they hadn't played anybody. And I had the good sense to say, given the playoff climate as recently as last week, I thought if Indiana lost convincingly, they should be out of the playoff. Now, a lot changed there. I'll get to that in a second. But Indiana was not fraudulent. I want to very, very clearly maintain what I said last week. Indiana wasn't fraudulent. In my own power ratings, I had Indiana number 10, which doesn't mean anything to a lot of you, but there is a big difference in sometimes a team being undefeated, but, they'll be an underdog in games and stuff like that, and you'll say, wow, why does Vegas not think about this team, what the AP does or what the committee does? Well, whatever Vegas thinks is whatever they think, although they agreed. I thought very highly. Like, I thought Indiana's body of work very much matched the hype they were getting. I thought their ranking was deserved. My only pushback was the same kind of pushback that I've given to teams in various conferences over the years when it comes to the playoff. The playoff resume conversation, to me, is not always about just quality of team you have. If you have a noticeably inferior quality of schedule, I've been of the opinion in the past, I don't care if you're the Kansas City Chiefs playing college football. If you don't face the minimum baseline requirement of resistance on your schedule, you should not qualify for the playoff. You have not deserved a spot in it. That's not your fault. That's your schedule's fault. But I've held that stance before. I've made that argument for years. So my argument as recently as last week was, this is Indiana's shot. It's not their fault their schedule falls the way it does, but it's not my fault. And it's not Tennessee's fault, or it's not anyone else's fault. If Indiana doesn't get the job done here, hat tip to them, great season, they shouldn't be in. But then everything else fell the way it did. And so now you've removed benefit of doubt. I was willing to give other teams from other conferences benefit of doubt, but you screwed that up for yourself. So Curt Cignetti, in his postgame press conference yesterday, said, when asked whether they should still be in playoff consideration, he said, it's so clear. Well, he's right. He's right. Things have changed. The status quo has changed, as John Voight once said in National Treasure. Hello. He's right. So, ironically, Indiana lost convincingly, and yet here I am saying, if they don't lose again, they deserve to be in the playoff, because that's how crazy yesterday was. So I've never taken anything away from that team. Words will get twisted a lot. I was never taking anything away from that team. But I also wasn't giving them preferential treatment. I was going to judge them just the same, a resume-based judgment relative to the rest of the field. And if they didn't stack up, it didn't matter if they're a good, cute story. That doesn't matter. That's just emotion. You shouldn't even be judging teams. You shouldn't be judging which conference they're from. You ought to be judging a blind resume. Everyone else can insert the biases or the claims of bias, which I'll get to later. But Indiana is in now. You can lose me with the counter argument because there is not a conference in this country, including the SEC, that gets to blanketly throw out claims of their strength of schedule given what's happened over the last 24 to 48 hours and enjoy benefit of the doubt. Most years you would have it. This year you do not. So congratulations to Ohio State. Oh boy, they got Michigan this weekend. Jesse, did we get an early line on that? I mean, it's fat. I know it's over 3 touchdowns. Ohio State is favored to win the Big Ten, by the way. They're minus 145 favorite, and Oregon is plus 120 at FanDuel. I know Ohio State's over 3 touchdown favorite. They play that game in the shoe. I saw forecast high in the low 30s, so it'll be right in line weather-wise with what they've had in the past. 20.5. Okay, so not over 3 touchdowns. I think vengeance is coming Saturday. I know it's been a fun time at Michigan over the past few days because, first off, you guys covered emphatically for me yesterday, and I very much appreciate it. And you got your quarterback of the future, but he is not playing Saturday, and we'll predict that game later this week. Crazier things have happened. It is 2007 2.0 at this point, so crazier things have happened. I don't think it's going to happen in that game. Quick Trip is fueling the whole new Saturday tour. We've been at that game the past 3 years, right, Jesse? Colin? Yeah, so the past 3 years I've gone to the Ohio State-Michigan game. And for a youth who hails from rural Georgia, trust me, I never thought I would be able to go to that game. So I've been blessed to see that the last 3 consecutive years. However, I don't think that game's going to be competitive this year. And so I call up our friends at Quick Trip. I say, guys, we got to figure out a new game to go to, right? It's rivalry weekend. We're going to go to the Iron Bowl? No, that could go either direction. It's going to be one of the most toxic feeling environments in the Iron Bowl lore since 2010. I don't want any part of that. I'm not going to Ohio State, Michigan. Where am I going to go? Well, I'm going to tell you where I'm going to go. I have telegraphed this all season. I'm going to go home for Thanksgiving first off. So we'll be down in Georgia Wednesday and Thursday. And then we'll hop on the Quick Trip Express and we will head right out to Texas because Texas is playing Texas A&M this Saturday with a trip to the SEC Championship game on the line. A&M is battered. They are bruised. They are bleeding. They are limping back to College Station. And you know the only thing that changes now is they get to be the home team, and Texas gets to be the one that goes on the road in the treacherous SEC in late November. You talk about wounded animal mode. Reveille in wounded animal mode, dangerous, very dangerous. You know I'm high on Texas. That was my preseason pick to win the SEC. I'm not backing off of them. You see me, hands up. I'm not backing off of them, but they got it to do. Because if this year has taught us anything, it is that it is a fool's errand to think that results just duplicate week over week. The last thing I expect from A&M this Saturday is a carbon copy of what I got yesterday. That's the last thing I expect from them. So they may not beat Texas, but it may look a little different is all I'm saying. We're looking forward to getting to this one. Whew. Also, I'll just put it out there, okay? I just want to put this out there. I don't care which charter jet company it is that's listening. I know I've spoken to you guys from time to time. We've gone long ways down the road of doing business with each other, but I've never signed on the dotted line. I'm flat out telling you, I want to be at South Carolina Clemson this Saturday at high noon, and I want to be in College Station at 7:30. So this is the most consumed college football show in digital media. Your signage will look very good on this set, and the traffic would go a long way doing business with us. I'm happy to discuss those terms. I just want to be at those two games this Saturday because that was very hard, as it turns out, to choose between. And so why should we have to choose? Let's just do both. You know how to get in touch with me. Florida did what? They beat Ole Miss. Yes, they did. Why wouldn't we? Why would we be surprised at that? They're a top 25 team. No, they're not, Josh. Well, you're right. The AP does not have Florida ranked in the top 25. But we have never quit Florida. JP polls had them in the top 25 for a while. This game was good. We gave it 4 Chali on the 1 to 5 Chalice rating scale. And we, if you listened to the show last week, took a fair amount of criticism because I started to make this point about Florida a few weeks ago. Florida with DJ Lagway is a top 25 caliber team, just full stop. And you either watch them and you get what I'm saying or you hear what I'm not saying. Because there are a lot of folks out there who just like want to hate the SEC. So if you say anything remotely positive about an SEC member institution, it gets twisted and misconstrued. So, you know, like what I didn't say was Florida belongs in the top 25. What I didn't say is Florida should be mentioned anywhere near the playoff. I didn't say any of those things because those things aren't true. I don't feel that. I actually don't care about that at all as it relates to yesterday's game, Ole Miss going to Gainesville. What caliber of team are they going to face? What caliber of challenge are they going up against? And truthfully, it doesn't really matter what happened a few months ago against Miami as it relates to that. That Miami game in week 1 happened, and it's on your resume, and you should have to pay for it because you lost that game convincingly. But if DJ Lagway is your starting quarterback now, and he's healthy, and he's doing things that really no other quarterback in the country is doing, then I look at you and I say, you got 40-plus blue-chip players still on this team. They haven't quit on Billy Napier. You got an alien at quarterback, still got 90,000 in the swamp. I don't really think I'm playing my typical 5-5 team here. Like, I don't really think that's the resistance level that I'm going to get. So we saw that a few weeks ago. We said it was going to be the case in this game, and it was. And so people either understand that or they just say, no, you are what your record says you are, and this was a horrible loss for Ole Miss. Well, it wasn't a horrible loss, but it's a loss, and it counts, and Ole Miss is out of this thing now. I'll tell you the loss that's bad for Ole Miss is the Kentucky loss. That's the loss that's really bad. I can stomach them going down there and taking an L in this environment against that team. It's the Kentucky loss that gave them no margin for error. The padlock stat here, very simple. Paper popping simple. Red zone. Florida was 2 of 2 down there for 14 points. Ole Miss 0 of 3 for 0 points. That's what decided this game. Florida ran it pretty well. 45 times, 164 yards. Lagway's just doing one or two things per game that put your jaw on the ground. His stat line's not out of this world. He was 10 of 17 in this game. It's never a performance that if you're box score surfing is going to stand out to you. But if you're scrolling through social media, if you're not watching the game, during a Florida game with that dude playing, you're going to be scrolling, and then boom, you're going to see it. He's just doing something at a random point in the third quarter that no other quarterback in the country is doing physically. And he did it again yesterday. And you can't do anything. You can't defend it. You just tip your cap and you say, how did that just happen? First, you got to watch the replay. And then after you watch the replay, you say, how do you defend that? And the answer is you don't. And so that's kind of what Ole Miss dealt with yesterday, but it was self-inflicted too for Ole Miss. And that's been the case in a lot of their losses. The way Ole Miss's season has gone is so confounding to me. Ole Miss was a team that had struggled to get over that big game hump. And then this year they beat Georgia resoundingly, but it's the Kentuckys of the world. You know, it's the Floridas of the world. As much respect as I have for the caliber of ball Florida's playing right now, that's still a game Ole Miss has got to go win. If you fancy yourself a playoff team, you got to go win that game. And they don't do it, and they play some of their worst football of the season in the biggest moment. This is November. This is when you're supposed to be scaling. In the Kentucky, LSU, and Florida games, Ole Miss has given up 14 sacks and 25 tackles for loss. That's what makes them so hard to predict. I had one of my own friends, one of our own, came at me because I had Ole Miss at number 2 or 3 last week in the JP poll, which is a power rating, not a ranking. And they said, man, I bet you regret having them up there. I don't. That model said what it said about them. But the thing about Ole Miss is the Georgia game was real, but the Kentucky game was real. And what I mean by that is both of those versions of that team are out there. It just turns out that as they got deeper into the season, the bad version of Ole Miss did not get filtered out. It was still there. And what you hope when you see these teams with really, really like high-end potential is they start hitting that different gear. That's what the good ones do, or the great ones do that, I should say. They hit a different gear in November. And it makes you say things like, and I remember earlier in the season, this team, remember that game against so-and-so? Now look at them, though. That's the way they're talking about Oregon, the Wisconsin game notwithstanding, which I think was dynamics related. I mean, Oregon struggled against Idaho in week 1. Does anyone even remember that now? No, because they've scaled up. They're playing their best ball at the right time. Ole Miss just didn't do that. They didn't figure out a way to do that. It's a shame. It's gut-wrenching because this team was not put together in a typical way. This was an all-in 2024 approach for Ole Miss. Everybody knows it, who's honest with themselves. They went all in, chips to the middle of the table. They're going to field a team next year. It's nothing like that. But this was the one. This needed to be the one, and it will not be the one. And the hardest part about it is you can go back to those 3 losses and you can say, I mean, the LSU game's tough. But this Florida game, the red zone, the turnovers, the Kentucky game, didn't even top 20 points at home. That's on us. Billy Napier's going to finish 7-5. If they beat Florida State, and I think they're going to go in dry on them. If they beat Florida State this Saturday, they're going to finish 7-5. And that, again, goes to show you Meemaw's golden rule about head coaches is still in effect today, just as it's always been. Don't judge them until the end of the year. I like a lot of you are watching live right now. And then, by the way, if you're watching live, please subscribe to the channel because we do the show all year round, and you subscribing helps us do that. But a lot of you are watching live right now. We got like 11,000 people watching live. Think about your opinion on Billy Napier. Or if you're listening to the replay, whatever. Think about your opinion on Billy Napier. How much has it changed this year? After the Miami game, it's really, really bad. But then later in the year, they rebound a little bit. And then they go to overtime against Tennessee, and they almost beat them. And then they beat LSU, and now they've beaten Ole Miss, and it's like been up, down, up, down. It's like a seismograph. It's like you live in L.A., and it's a seismograph. And is that really how I want to think about head coaches? They put a microphone in my face 3 days a week. Is that really how I want my opinion to change on head coaches? My answer is no. So by and large, you'll notice I don't do any hot seat talk on this show. With Napier earlier in the season, all I did really with Napier was regurgitate what we were getting from big voices down at Florida. He was done. Napier was done. I mean, that thing was sealed. And then a funny thing happened. He kept coming to work. And that staff kept coming to work. And most importantly, those players kept coming to work. I was talking to an NFL scout in week 3. And that NFL scout, longtime NFL scout, said he's going to lose that team. I mean, that team's going to go in the tank. And there was every reason to think that. They did not. When we were there in spring, I got criticized up and down because I just said, I think they're made of the right thing. They just haven't won enough. But I think the DNA of that program, the guts of that program, it's what it needs to be. Now they just got to go win. And then again this year, they didn't win enough. Faced the toughest schedule in the country, didn't win enough. And not only did they not win, they got blown out against Miami. They got blown out against A&M, both games at home. The program looked dead in the water. And all you can do is keep chopping. All the very, very old cliches are actually old because they work. And Napier it knows no other way. And now you're in a situation where a lot of people close to the Florida program who once left him for dead, now you got to make a decision, and you better fully buy in because that is your guy. Like, Napier is still your guy. And the locker room is telling you that. The performance of that team is telling you that. That quarterback, you want to see how important a position is as to the future of a program. Look elsewhere. Look around the country. And then know you've got one. You've got one other folks would envy. And he's tied to that head coach. You save buyout money, redirect it. Redirect it over to NIL. I personally have got to remind myself constantly, you got to wait until the end of the season to judge these guys. Because if you and I talked in July, you would have said, and I would have agreed with you, if Florida wins 7 games this year, that's a very successful season. They're probably going to win 7 games. And yet the guy was fired 5 times at various points this year. Crazy how this game works. It is that emotion, that week-to-week swing. Once you get into the fog of the season, I don't think Sun Tzu ever called it that, but I do. The fog of the season. It's tough. It's tough. Opinions go all over the place. All you can do is breathe deep and pop the top on a cold Zevia. We're going grape tonight, if that's okay with everyone. I've put the cream soda aside, and I have temporarily gone with grape tonight. And straight from the can, too. It's straight from the can Sunday here. You'll notice that, well, I hope you don't notice my eyes are a little bloodshot, but they are. I was in Tempe, Arizona last night for Arizona State's win over Brigham Young. What a great trip. I'd never been there before. Have you guys been there before? Like in the live chat, yes or no, have you been there before? I don't think most of you have. Now, I met a lot of folks who watch the show that are out there. You need to go out there. You guys, especially late in the year, it was 82 degrees at kickoff yesterday. Absolutely zero humidity. I mean, I could have snapped my fingers and started a fire on the sideline. It was so dry. It was perfect. It was great. And it was a red letter day. It was a red letter day in Tempe. I give it 3.5 Chalai on the 1 to 5 scale. 28 to 23 was the final. A red letter day is the kind of day in your life that you look back on years later and say, that right there was an important day. Like this right here was an important day for Arizona State football. It was an important day for like Graham Rossini, the AD there on the field. It was an important day for Kenny Dillingham. It was an important day for those players. But it was an important day for the program. I grew up in, as I have told you many a time, very rural Georgia. I knew about the SEC. I knew about Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, those kinds of teams. I knew about USC. I always had a very weird fascination with Arizona State and Texas A&M, which at the time was not an SEC team. I used to always think, why don't those programs win more? Who knows? So I go on about my business, live my life. This is my first opportunity to really go out there. I see what they mean. I see what I thought I meant about Arizona State all these years. Nothing holds that place back from being a winner. accept that place. There's nothing that you need that's not there, although it could be there in more abundance, which I think will come with wins like this. But there's a lot of stuff you cannot get elsewhere that's there. There is great weather. There's a passionate fan base. There's talent. How should I put this? Talent of all kinds that greatly helps in recruiting. It's an amazing place. And then you cap it off with a win from a program that was left for dead like 24 months ago. It was almost like the car's going off the cliff. Here, Dillingham will take the wheel. Oh, look, he swerved. He got back on the road. Hey, how did he do that? Hey, when you've got what I call competitive ignorance, you don't know any better. Like you take over a program that's been left for dead, and Herm Edwards just blowtorches the place on his way out. Every sanction imaginable's floating over your head. Oh, Kenny's from here. He'll take it. He'll ride us through the dark days. No, he'll just turn on the light. He's just turned on the light. He said, look, he's turned on the light. They were picked next to last in the Big 12 this year. They are probably going to the Big 12 championship game. And Cam Scattaboo yesterday, 28 carries, 147 yards. Jordan Tyson, I am telling you, Brigham Young thought they had an answer for him, and they did not. 9 catches, 125 yards. They've gone from 3-9 to 9-2. I know a lot of you disagree with me when I say the Big 12 is America's college football conference, but the reason I call it that, a lot of you are new around here, the reason I call the Big 12 America's college football conference is I listen to you. A lot of you have complained about competitive imbalance in the sport, although this year it looks a lot different. But historically, what have you complained about? I'm describing most of you, I know, because I talked to a lot of you. You've said, I don't like the same few teams winning. You don't like all the roster churn. A lot of you don't like how full the transfer portal is every cycle. You don't like hypocritical coaches who preach loyalty to a program, but then a third of them move every single year. And so you would like there to be a more loyal adherence to what college football was for you growing up. It's the Big 12. That's what the Big 12's like. And it's so topsy-turvy. Last place can win the conference. First place, Utah was finished first, or they were picked to finish first. Utah had the best odds to win this thing. They're not even going to go bowling. Kansas State was next. Oklahoma State has no pulse. Oklahoma State was picked to finish third. That's competitive balance. That's parity. That's any given Saturday. And they're delivering it like every week in the Big 12. And what disappoints me, I've called some of you out privately on this. What disappoints me is you guys have claimed you won all these things, and when I credit the Big 12 and I call it America's College Football Conference, you guys shoot it down. Oh, that's not being played at the same level as the Big 10. Well, who cares? Whoever said it was, by the way. Well, that doesn't compare to the SEC. Then don't compare it to the SEC. Well, they're not going to win the national championship. They're probably not. Probably not. But you know what? Someone's going to win the Big 12 championship. I have that on good authority. And it's probably not going to be the team you expected in August. And that's a beautiful thing. Brigham Young was confident coming into this game. I don't think people knew it, but that BYU quarterback had been banged up last week. And they thought that he was a lot better yesterday. And they thought they matched up. One thing they couldn't afford is Arizona State having a fast start and them turning the ball over. And they did both of those things. And Arizona State took advantage of it. And, wow, what a story. It's two of the best stories in college football going against each other yesterday. And it was a pleasure to be able to stand on the sideline there and get a mild sunburn, knowing full well the rest of my friends were in Columbus, Ohio, freezing. Director Colin is rolling exclusive video from the iJosh right now. Kenny Dillingham, little sus on the late game decision-making, and I would tell him that, and I did. But look at that, a Hail Mary falls short. 3 yards short. And here comes the second field storming in about 20 minutes. Crazy scene. Most of you watched it on TV. We are so accustomed to this. I don't know how many field stormings this is for us. Maybe 1 million. Who knows? But I'm always there in the trenches. Imagine being in a suite watching this. Management gets to watch that sort of thing from the bird's eye view. No, we're down there in the trenches taking grenades because that's our people. That's where we always grew up wanting to be. No one grows up wanting to be in the suite. You want to be on the field. So we grew up, and we got the opportunity. And so we're on the field, and Arizona State treated us well. Joe Conley, strength and conditioning, probably talked to that guy for like a combined 5 hours. this week, and he turned that weight room over to us 2 days in a row. So we appreciate it, man. All right, tough segment coming up. Tough segment, but a necessary one. A lot of you, like I said, we got over 11,000 watching live. And I know why you're here. Some of you are here because you support me. I know a lot more of you are here because there are certain allegations that have been hurled my way. So here we go. What happened to the SEC this weekend? Disaster, implosion. The SEC, over the span of an afternoon, sort of imploded in on itself like a dying star. And a lot of us, I have to include myself unfortunately, who had spent a majority of last week arguing hypothetical scenarios, like idiots, had our mouths zipped shut because a lot of it was deemed irrelevant. Because when Alabama totes a third L, they don't look as attractive. That playoff resume doesn't look as great for Ole Miss. Once they tote a third L, once A&M late into the evening at Jordan-Hare Stadium after the most ridiculous rule and format in college football is applied, doesn't really make your argument hold a lot of weight. And we've gotten this deep into the show, and a lot of you are wondering, well, where's the Sarah McLachlan special? It was in the entire SEC yesterday. Roll it, Colin. Ole Miss has everything in front of them. We're all in for 2024. This is it. This is our year. Collective. Third loss. Who, to Georgia? Nah. Kentucky, LSU, and Florida. Done. Bye. Next. Alabama. Everything in front of them. Wide open path to Atlanta. All we got to do is go beat a probably not bowl-bound Oklahoma and a lifeless Auburn. And who even knows what happens against Auburn? It's irrelevant. They're not going to Atlanta because they couldn't even go to Norman and score an offensive touchdown. Goodbye, Alabama. Next, Texas A&M. Tough on the road this year, but they've got an opportunity to rectify it. We got Texas on deck, but we're focused on Texas. We're focused on Auburn. I should have known, but I watched it anyway, and A&M falls. Not in regulation, but in overtime. And they suffer another loss. And the SEC's balloon it's not all the way flat. It's not all the way popped. And crazier things have happened, so we'll see what happens this Saturday. But it was a volcanic Saturday for the SEC. And let me tell you something. My friends in Tennessee, my friends in Georgia, the volcano erupted, and the only reason you didn't get killed is because you guys just happened to be out of town. Because everyone who was in town pretty much died yesterday. Figuratively, of course. Legally, I think we have to say that. Hey, don't think I didn't see what UMass was doing to Georgia for a while. So, I don't think it's done. I'm really worried. I don't think it's done. Now, of course, people think I have SEC tramp stamped on my lower back, and I don't. But what I had said about this conference is I think it's a better conference and a deeper conference than any conference in college football. Therefore, I think the strength of the typical SEC schedule, Missouri and Texas notwithstanding, is to be respected a little bit more than that of, say, Indiana or even a Penn State or even a Notre Dame. And the reason I had gone into that argument is because a lot of people have started to do the hypothetical of you can't let more than 3 teams or 4 SEC teams in. And I was like, well, if 5 deserve to be in, put 5 in. But then when they lose, guess what happens? With more information, you can change the tune you're singing. So you won't hear me sing that tune this week. Why? Because things changed. I will say this, though. I do disagree that the SEC is a bad conference this year. The SEC, to me, actually is still the highest caliber conference and is still the deepest conference this year. The SEC's problem is they got no elite teams. There is no 2019 LSU down here. If they were, they just buzzsaw the entire conference. There is no 2020 Alabama. If they were, they'd buzzsaw the entire conference. I think Oregon and or Ohio State would fare very well in the SEC this year. But what the SEC has is they got no 10s. They got a bunch of 7s and 8s. And what happens to a bunch of 7 and 8s is they don't elevate to 10, therefore they are prone to this kind of stuff happening. You can think what you want about it, but a 2019 LSU is above the fray. Okay, once they hit their stride, they'd go into Oklahoma and they'd destroy Oklahoma last night. They'd do the same thing on the road at Florida. They would have done the same thing on the road at Auburn. The 2020 Alabama would have gone on the road to Auburn last night. They would have handled business. But we don't have that in the SEC this year. What we've got is we've got a bunch of pretty good to really good teams. But when you have that, remember what we talked about a few weeks ago? Speaking generically, great teams never play bad. Great teams' worst performances are just good. But good teams can turn in all sorts of variety of performance. Good teams can perform great, but good teams can perform bad. On average, they just play good. That's why they're a good team. But the difference when you go from having no elite teams to a bunch of good teams is it's just going to wildly vary week to week. Ole Miss can play like they did against Georgia. Ole Miss can play like they did against Florida, and it's the same team. You just have no clue what's coming. But the reason why I've made the argument that I was making about more SEC teams deserving to be in is because I've always given that conference benefit of the doubt because I respect the league schedule most teams play. But you also have to keep in mind, and I have all year, it's why I haven't said SEC schedule hardly at all. The term SEC schedule doesn't mean much of anything. In the imbalanced nature of the scheduling of the league now, you could play Missouri's schedule or you could play Florida's, Georgia's schedule. You play Texas's schedule, and they look completely different. So, the state of things right now is they may get as few as 3 teams in, also known as Danny Cannell Christmas list. But we do still have a week to play. Now, as much as I say that, that could also mean more chaos. That could mean Georgia Tech over Georgia. That could mean any of a number of things. So it could be that the SEC's few remaining prize eggs get cracked. But I think the best anti-SEC argument is one that I never even hear. And I appreciate you guys watching if you are, listening if you are. Please subscribe to the channel. I'm asking that a lot tonight, but only because we have found calls to action really work. Because most of you think you're subscribed, but you're not. And it costs nothing, and it's free, and it doesn't sign you up for anything. It just helps us. I'm going to do you a favor. If you're actually on board the anti-SEC train, and you just shout into the ether anytime that my name is associated with any of these teams, I'll make your argument for you. You're not even making the right argument. Most of the time it's nonsense. I had to block a lot of people this weekend. I Brandon Walkered a lot of people. Never thought I'd see the day. But I have come to realize that there are a lot of folks who talk trash on the internet who do not watch the show. And they do not listen, and they cannot critically think. So maybe in 2025, after the new year, I'll unblock everybody. But I got no time for that right now. If you want to have a logic-based rebuttal to something I'm saying, that's fine. I'd actually love to do a whole show of that. That'd be totally fine. But if you, after Texas A&M loses to Auburn, come at me and say, what happened to juggernaut Texas A&M? I got nothing for you because I never called them that. I've called them a very flawed team. I've called them all flawed teams. Anyway, here's the argument. If you really want to make the anti-SEC argument, what you ought to say is that's the trade-off. Losing these games, having to play in these environments, that's the trade-off to having access to the pipeline. Everyone talks about how South Carolina would perform in the Big 12. Well, that's a foolish notion because if South Carolina were in the Big 12, they wouldn't have access to the media rights revenue share that they do because they're in the SEC. And also, let's be real, a lot of the recruits you land because there is appeal to playing in the SEC. All of that's real. That's the argument you should be making. So you get to reap those benefits. You don't get to complain then when you have to compete against other teams that reap those benefits. That's the cost of doing business in the SEC. Have I been clear? That's the argument you ought to make. You ought to make that argument, and then it renders all of this, let's give SEC teams the benefit of the doubt, you aren't what your record says, you are a moot. I would have a counter to it. But I'm saying that in a debate setting, that'd be how to come at someone like, well, not like me because I've been slandered in this whole thing, but someone who is blindly espousing SEC bias. That's how you come at them. Now, I do want to say this. As I was being slandered, and all I want you guys to do is feel sorry for me. That's all I've ever wanted. I had, I don't know how many NFL scouts text me this weekend or come up to me at the game I was at and said, hey, we sit over here and watch. They're like Sting in the rafters. They don't ever help out. They just watch. And they said, yeah, clearly you're right about the different caliber of team or roster that exists in the SEC. We see it every week. Like, we're on the road. We watch it every week. We know. But I looked for myself because I just feel like you get shortchanged when you go. I will defend this point to the day I die. Auburn's been a bad team this year. Oklahoma's been a bad team this year. Florida has been a bad team this year. And they got bad records, and they don't deserve to go anywhere other than maybe a minor bowl. But as I actually had a head coach text me this, I wrote it down. Head coach not in the SEC yesterday texted me and said, here's the difference in 5-5 in the SEC. That roster still could have 15 or 20 future NFL guys on it, and you may be playing in front of 90,000 people when you face them. And that's not something that exists anywhere else. Now, if you're a great team, you just go beat them into submission anyway. But you may not be a great team. And this year, we really don't have many elite teams out there. We just got a bunch of pretty good teams. So if you're Ole Miss, you're pretty good, you get thrown into that mix. Well, then you're going and you're facing a Florida team. You could be playing an Auburn team. You could be playing Oklahoma. And I found it really interesting. I had producer Jesse. I told him, I don't care about their record. Go get me the blue chip ratio for those teams. And I want to compare it. You know, if I go play the bottom of the Big Ten right now, I'm playing Northwestern, or I'm playing, who else would be that? Wake Forest would be like near the bottom of the ACC or whatever. Auburn's near the bottom of the SEC. Oklahoma, Florida, those teams are near the bottom of the league standings. Northwestern's got 7 blue chip players on the roster. Auburn's got 43. Wake Forest has 5 blue chip players on the roster. Oklahoma has 57. It doesn't change what those teams' records are. All it means is if you catch those teams on the wrong night, you're playing against future Sunday players. Like, you're playing against a bunch of guys that make you look at them and say, how are you 5-5? It doesn't matter if they're 5-5, though, if you get them on the wrong night. If you get them on the wrong night, you're playing a high caliber team who's just been wildly inconsistent or has underachieved all year. But, you know, I got Auburn last night is a perfect example. We've watched them all year. And I've said, I think that's like a top 25 caliber offense. They just can't stop turning the ball over. Well, voila, they don't turn the ball over last night, even turnover battle. And they hang 40-plus on Texas A&M. So it's an interesting thing. I will say this, though. You've got what you want from me. I'm not banging the SEC drum anymore. That conference has lost the benefit of the doubt. And at this point, if a 3-loss Alabama backs into the playoff, whatever. If they don't, whatever. But I'm not going to be sitting there fighting for them because I never wanted the playoff to expand anyway. So if we're fighting over 3-loss teams that have lost a quarter of the games they play, if we're fighting over whether they get it or not, I'm going to be almost indifferent towards it because they never would have had a slightest prayer in the 4-team format anyway. And I told myself, when this 12-team playoff comes around, don't you be the fool who's arguing that number 13 got screwed, because you know good and well number 13 would have been an afterthought in the BCS era or an afterthought in the 4-team era. And I do need help. I do need help because I cannot promise that I won't fall down that slippery slope. College football officiating. I need a drink of water. Apologies to my friends at Zevia. I mean, we will take a sip of the grape here. But I need a full sip of water. Yes, Jesse, we are. I'll tell you what. I'll do Auburn A&M here, and because that'll lead right into what I'm talking about. Auburn fell to A&M last night. Actually, Auburn beat A&M last night. This was a game that went late into the night. It's a game that saw A&M on the road. They lost at South Carolina on the road. They lose at Auburn on the road 43-41. A&M, man, they've gotten down in these games. They trailed LSU. They trailed in this one. They trailed in South Carolina. They were down 21-0. They came back, but they ended up losing the game. This was wildly entertaining. I gave this 4.5 Chali. I think most of you probably watched this game. 4.5 Chali on the 1 to 5 scale for me. Peyton Thorne goes off. Cam Coleman goes off. Jarquez Hunter goes off. It was always there. This is the thing, if you're an Auburn fan, that's got to drive you up a wall. If you're Hugh Freeze, I just imagine Hugh Freeze, you're happy you won. and they storm the field, and you're celebrating, and you're red-faced, and you're pouring sweat. But then at some point, these coaches get in their car and they drive home. And you've just got to sit there and stare at your steering wheel and say, wait a second, if we just did this tonight, that means we were capable of doing that technically all year. Why did it take so long? I don't know. But I will say this. It's very promising, okay? It leaves a really good taste in your mouth. You couldn't be any more sky high going into the Iron Bowl, and that's all well and good. You go back and you look at the losses, and you were minus turnovers in virtually every one of them. You end up being even in turnovers last night, and you got a really, really good win here. And you could get a great one this upcoming week, but you got to go into Tuscaloosa to do it. But Texas A&M's defense has let them down, man. A&M's defense is supposed to be something they can lean on. That's got to be looked at. Now, they've still got the SEC Championship on their plate. They still control their destiny as to whether they get to Atlanta, because one of their losses is to Notre Dame. So they're a 3-loss team, but only 2 conference losses. But those defensive lapses, and then also just the early deficits, if you look in their losses, it's too much to overcome. You're asking your offense to do too much. And it's another classic example, man, of a situation where you've got to be so buttoned up on the road. In the SEC, you've got to be so buttoned up on the road because it is nasty. Like going into Auburn, you're facing a bad team. They put 90,000 in there anyway. And what always used to boggle my mind when I was younger and I would watch those games, I was like 5 or 6. I didn't fully understand the magnitude of college football yet. I would watch a team whose record was bad. Let's say it's Auburn. I would watch a team whose record was bad, and yet maybe not quite this was happening. They're storming the field there, but like a touchdown would happen or a 4th down stop on the goal line would happen. These people are going crazy, and the little version of me would say, but they can't even win the national championship. Why are they going crazy? Because it's Auburn, and they love it. I cannot believe I just said that. It's part of the Auburn creed, but it is, and they didn't even pay me to say that. Those words just organically came out of my mouth. It is a beautiful thing when you got a fan base that does not have to have the playoff tied to a game to invest maximum emotion into the game. I always appreciate it when I see it. I think we're storming fields a little bit too much in college football, but I don't have to pay the fine, whatever. A&M gets the money, and good for them. Good for them. You know, I know they fall short cash-wise out there a little every now and then, so that's good for them. But Mike Elko, it's year one, just like Kalen DeBoer. It's year one. So they're learning, and they're fighting because they've got a roster that's technically good enough to win these games. So you should be in the playoff mix, but you're also simultaneously trying to cast your vision. I was out there. We'll be out there this Saturday. I was out there a little while ago. I sat down with Elko for a while in his office, and I said, realistically, how much of your stuff can you get implemented in the first year? And it was just interesting to hear his answer. I won't share a lot of it, but it was interesting to hear his answer because it's tough, man. It's tough. That spring and summer, if you're a fan and you're dealing with that football, it feels like an eternity. But if you work in college football, that stuff goes by like that. There is no extended downtime. Like every day is allocated and accounted for. So good for Auburn. Now they've got an opportunity. I think they're at 5 wins right now. I think they need to beat Alabama to be bowl eligible. And, you know, some people value the bowl practices you get over going to a bowl. Hugh Freeze's team could be radically better next year. This year's not over, but they could be radically better next year. And I'm sure all the preview magazines will pick up on that, and there'll be a trendy pick by August. But good for them. Good for them. Badly needed. Good for them. Now we transition. We've got a problem. We got a big problem in college football. The SEC's got a big problem. You know what, Colin? I want to slide the Zevia over and start this segment over. We got a big problem in college football. Officiating's terrible. If you know me, you know I never complain about this stuff. I don't believe in complaining about it. It has gotten so egregiously bad, I have no choice but to be the guy who complains about this stuff. You remember a few weeks back, Georgia goes into Austin, and that officiating crew just embarrasses themselves. And you remember that initially a call is made, and then there's a timeout on the field because a bunch of trash rains down on the field, and that gives them enough time to watch the replay on the scoreboard. Then they change the call, which was sus AF on the surface, and it was such an embarrassment. It was so Bush League. It was so embarrassing, and I came on the show the next night, and I called it out for what it was. It was pathetic. It should never be something that happens at the highest levels of college football. Truthfully, it's unacceptable at the middle school level, but it especially shouldn't be happening at the highest levels of college football. And then I said the next night, what's the most pathetic about this is you will never hear another word about it. Texas and Georgia may get some internal communication that doesn't mean anything because you can't go back and redo the game. And it didn't change the outcome of the game per se, but it could. And it's pathetic that it happens even if it's a 50-point blowout. But I said, you, me, people who are responsible for this sport being as big as it is and as profitable as it is will never get an answer. And we never got an answer. And that brings me to last night, because that same crew was in Norman, Oklahoma. Bama's down 3 possessions. It's early fourth quarter. They're driving. And Ryan Williams, I want you to look at him there. He's this wide receiver here in the middle. You and I look at that, and we see a normal formation. But my guy off the screen to the bottom apparently saw him covered up. And so this play is allowed to unfold, and it's 4th down and 3. You can see the scores, 24-3. It's 4th and 3, probably a last gasp for Alabama here. And Milroe just uncorks a 40-yard bomb to the end zone. Ryan Williams catches it, one of the best plays I've seen all year. And that thing's called back for illegal touching. That's a loss of down. Ball changes possession to Oklahoma. Kalen DeBoer looks like he's going to shift someone in the neck. You will get no answer for it. It's inexplicable to happen at the lowest levels of football. This is the SEC. It is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. College football in and of itself is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. You got guys working part-time who aren't even held to the same standard nationally. One place does it one way, another place does it their way, and even if they did, you never get an answer. You're going to go to work tomorrow, and you're going to be held accountable for doing your job. And if you don't do it good enough, you're either going to be called out publicly or you may get fired. These dudes go turn in a terrible performance. They humiliate themselves. The conference ought to be embarrassed, but apparently they aren't enough. And so you got to leave it up to them to be embarrassed, I guess, for themselves, because you're never going to get them. You're never going to hear from them publicly, because God forbid we actually make coaches talk to the media. Oh, we do that, don't we? Well, we certainly have got to protect players from the media. They're just 19 years old. No, they talk to them as well. No, the only ones that don't have to answer for themselves are the ones who are charged with enforcing the rules. The very officiating mechanism, the enforcement mechanism on the game. Those are the guys who actually make the calls, who are never tasked with answering for it. You don't even get a blanket pool report on most of this stuff. It's so pathetic. It ought not be accepted. And again, remember, this is not the olden days. This is not the olden days where you go work at your dad's fertilizer plant Monday through Thursday, and I'm going to go call the Alabama A&M game Saturday. This is the SEC in 2024, and that's the best they can do. It's not the best they can do. It's just what they're willing to do right now, because no one really calls them on it. Like, I give Fowler and Herbstreit a lot of credit last night. Their rules expert on the broadcast, I think, pointed it out. But if we're being real with each other, that network is in bed with the conference. They have an exclusive media rights deal. I don't even blame those guys. They're not going to go after the throat of those officials. And it's not even the officials I have a problem with. I got supreme respect for people who officiate this game. Major league umpires, I got supreme respect for them. It's not even that. It shouldn't be up to them. It should be up to the people they answer to. It is Greg Sankey at the SEC league office. It's Tony Petitti at the Big Ten league office, who ought to have long ago looked at their product and said, this is 2024. We just cashed a check with how many zeros on the end? This starts with a B. This says billions. It may be time for full-time officials. It may be time to nationalize officiating, where we have a same standard across the board. And me, as a paying customer at home, you know, the ones ultimately responsible for how much money you get to make and how profitable that league is because of my viewership habits and my attendance, therefore ticket sales. How about I get an answer every now and then? You know, I'm the entire reason you're here. How about I get an answer every now and then? No, all you get is threatened. If you're a coach, you better not speak out against us. Can't do that. Now you can get hung up in town square. You can get called out. That doesn't matter. But officials now they better not deal with that from you. They better not. Even though you could lose your job because of their bad calls, they better not deal with that from you. How are we here? How is this where it is? In 2024, you have got a billion-dollar industry and still the same nickel and dime enforcement arm that you've always had. I will say again, I am not calling into question individual officials. I am calling into question the unwillingness for the people you answer to put you in a better position. I'll share something with you because we're far enough away from it now. I've had 2 white hats on 2 different crews come up to me at games, before games. And I've gone in pretty hard on officiating this year, so you would think those guys would be pissed. They've thanked me because the tone I take on this is I don't put it on them. Those guys have got an incredibly hard job to do. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong. Understand, this last night, as egregious as it was, that guy has no recourse because it's not reviewable. There's no recourse. It's clear as day. The guy's not covered up. He has no recourse. He can't do anything about it. They're put in a very, very compromised position because the mechanisms aren't there as they should be. The method of training and the different clinicians that work some of these circuits that you have to go to get accredited to work your way up the ladder, like the way that works would boggle your mind. Actually, if you're familiar with inefficiency of any kind, then it wouldn't boggle your mind. You would look at it and you'd say, of course, makes perfect sense. That is officiating in college football right now. So you got good officials, you got bad officials. I don't even put it on those guys. They're not the ones making the rules. They're trying to enforce it as best they can. I don't ever hurl allegations of shadiness their way because I don't believe that. I've got no evidence of that. But I will tell you this. If you're at the league office in the SEC or the Big 12 or the ACC or the Big 10, you've got some stuff happening in your games that is so egregious that when it happens, how can you not help but for your first thought to go to something underhanded? I watched that garbage go down at Oklahoma last night, and there are very few other explanations for that other than, I wonder if there's something more to that guy making that call. You never heard me talk like that. I don't talk like that. But you look at this freeze frame right here, and you tell me Ryan Williams there looks covered up. The guy's standing 5 yards from it and throws the flag on it for illegal touching. You know what the internet does with that. The internet looks at that, and the internet looks at the proliferation of legalized gambling, and they make the connection. And it doesn't matter if it's not true. You let that stuff go unchecked, and you've allowed the integrity of your product to be compromised. And I got news for you. Once that happens, you don't get it back. So folks like to talk about leadership a lot at these league office levels. Take some leadership and fix a problem. Should have been fixed so long ago. It's so pathetic that is still acceptable. It's not acceptable, actually. It's so pathetic it's still presented as acceptable. Let's move along. FanDuel is the exclusive odds provider of our show. Hey, we admit it. There they are. There's FanDuel right there. They're very good to us. And we call it like we see it here, too. FanDuel, very, very, very nice to us the past few weeks in providing us some exclusive information right after the playoff rankings came out that you couldn't have gotten anywhere else. Still got all the profit boosts going on over there. Bet 5 to get 150 for new customers. Got all that going on, but they also have the Ramen Noodle Express. Actually, I've got it. I just partner with them on it. We had a winning week again yesterday. So toot toot, pulling into the station strong in November. I got 2 early best bets for you here. I'm going to go two teams we bet yesterday, and we're going to bet them again. Boston College minus 3.5. West Virginia plus 3.5. I'm going with both of them. Iowa's been really good to us. They made us money again yesterday. So we are sticking with what works. We have filtered out the teams that the model doesn't have a good read on, and we're sticking with what works here in November. We appreciate FanDuel. A few more added takeaways here. Penn State got by Minnesota yesterday, 26-25. That game had the same kind of vibe as Ole Miss, Florida to me. You know, in the interest of full disclosure, last week on Thursday, we talked about that game. You remember I told you Minnesota might as well be an 8-2 team. They were 2 plays away from being 8-2, which does not make them an 8-2 team, but it stands to reason Penn State may get more of a challenge here than your typical 6-4 caliber team, and they did. So the public saw Penn State as a double-digit favorite go on the road and have to squeak by a point. I think it's a good win for them because I viewed the dynamics of the game a little bit differently. And they overcame special teams miscues. They were bad on third down. They got down 10-0 early. This is a game Penn State should have lost. Like, they're supposed to lose that game, and they found a way. I feel the same way about the USC game earlier this year. You can either look at that and say, oh, USC's barely above 500 now. That wasn't a good win. Yeah, it was. Yes, it was. Because the team that Penn State played that day played them at a pretty high level. At least that's what my eyes saw. Drew Aller played good in this game. Drew Aller's had a couple of games. Ironically, that USC game and this one here. Run game didn't do a whole lot, and he had to come through, and he was 21 of 28, 244, and 2 touchdowns yesterday. Maybe Penn State has a different gear. You can't prove that against Minnesota. I get that. I'm not trying to claim anything more than what I'm claiming here. But this was not bad. I don't think negatively about this at all. This is a good win. The ACC, there it is. SMU, they win. They're headed to the ACC Championship game. Miami still needs to beat Syracuse, but if they do, they'll head to the ACC Championship game. And the big question now that we had all the SEC chaos yesterday is, could both of them get in? Yes. Yes, they could. But we still got a conference championship to play for there. I don't know, man. I still can't shake the idea that a team like Miami, with a quarterback like that, could be the one that gets hot. I think it's pretty inevitable now that at least one team that is so obviously flawed is going to make a run in the playoff, and it's not necessarily the one you expect. So, like, Miami can be that team. Tennessee could be that team. Penn State could be that team. I'm just talking about Miami at the moment. Kansas is rolling. Kansas is one of the best. They're one of the best 25 teams in the country right now. Right now. Kansas is just like Florida. Kansas is playing at a level right now that is a top 25 level, even though their record is below 500. That doesn't matter. Ask Colorado how much it mattered yesterday that Kansas was 4-6. Did you see them? Did you see Kansas against Brigham Young? Did you see Kansas against Iowa State? Do you really think that team's been playing 3-6 or 4-6 caliber football? No. Jalen Daniels has figured it out. That new offensive system, or that new offensive staff has figured it out there. Padlock stat, just 1 week after Colorado held Utah to 31 yards rushing, Kansas just put a 3 on the front of that. They had 331 yards rushing to Colorado's 42. Devin Neal, listen to this. Devin Neal, the tailback for Kansas, had 287 total yards, 4 touchdowns. He had 41 touches. We had to go back a couple of years to an Illinois game to find someone with more touches in a game. That's Derrick Henry stuff. Devin Neal went off. Iowa State and Arizona State have the upper hand as best we can tell in this whole Big 12 race now. Colorado losing. Had a lot of people scoreboard watching at Sun Devil Stadium yesterday as that was going on. Whew, the Big 12, there's like a 9-way tiebreaker scenario in the Big 12 that ultimately comes down to JP poll and coin flip, I think. Fun league to watch. Texas beat Kentucky. This game didn't catch any eyeballs. I'm noticing something about Texas, though. They outrushed Kentucky 250-21. The defense held Kentucky to 2 of 12 on third down, 232 total yards. Texas had 6 sacks. They had 11 tackles for loss. They're playing a caliber of football that's sustainable. That brand is sustainable. They can do that every week. So it doesn't matter that they don't hang 50. But if they can hang low 30s, but do that sustainably defensively, Texas can win a national title. But Texas can also lose this Saturday to Texas A&M because that gear, that offensive gear, is not quite there. But the totality of that team is good enough. So I respect the way they're going about it. Also, Quinn Ewers was reported to have gotten an MRI on his ankle. Looks like he's all good. Kind of precautionary. as it looks right now. So we expect him to be good to go for Texas A&M this Saturday. We'll be at that game, 7:30, 6:30 local kick, I guess, there in College Station under the lights. Could be the environment of the year in college football. I don't think America's fully prepared for what Texas versus Texas A&M looks like. Kids, if you're 12 years old, you're just starting to come into your own as a college football fan. Dad may not want you watching this one. This could be a put the women and children to bed special, but watch anyway. Just sneak away to watch anyway. It's great. Notre Dame, splattered Army. Not the entire Army, but just the football team, 49-14. Notre Dame took all the oxygen out of this thing early. Their first 5 drives, I think I saw they had 4 touchdowns, and they turned it over on downs at the Army 2. Just done. They've held the opponent to 14 or less in 6 straight games. So the $1 million question right now is Notre Dame for real as a national title contender? Most of you say no. I don't know, man, because it's 2024/2007 all over again. I just look at this lineup of teams they've done that against. Stanford, Georgia Tech without their starter, Navy, FSU, Virginia, and Army. If you're skeptical about a team's chances of proving themselves to you against that slate, especially after they lost to Northern Illinois, I get it. But here's what else I get. There's not an elite team out there. So if there's not one, that's the kind of year where a Notre Dame can make a little more noise than they normally would. Every other year Notre Dame's gone to the playoffs or the national title game, there's been at least one elite team in their way. Maybe there won't be this year. And maybe it still won't matter. But I'm just saying, I don't know anything. Like, we don't know anything. Notre Dame goes to USC this weekend. They are a 6.5-point favorite on the road in L.A. Lincoln Riley's got himself a new quarterback out there. USC's playing pretty good defense. Can they score enough? We will see. All right. I'm going to go get some sleep because I didn't get home until like 3 o'clock this morning. Direct flight from Phoenix, though. Thank you. Appreciate you guys immensely. So seriously now, we have our new set here. We're just figuring it out. It probably won't look the same in 2 weeks as it does now. But I wanna fill our space here with as much good cheer from you as we can. Like, look at all this. Director Colin just left it all blank back here. There we go. Because we want stuff from you. We're even willing to give you the studio address for it. That's how desperate we are for free stuff. So, serious submissions only. Let's decorate this place as only we can. Appreciate you guys for making it possible. We are going to have a Tuesday show at our usual time, I think. And then that's it. We may go early on Tuesday. Just stay tuned to the socials for that. But Thursday's Thanksgiving, they tell me. So we will not have a Thanksgiving show. And then we'll be off to College Station for Texas versus Texas A&M. So a condensed week, but a week nonetheless. Appreciate you guys so much. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Like, literally check and see if you're subscribed to the channel. And if you haven't already, just click it. That's it. You'll forget you ever did it. It'll just help us, and we appreciate it immensely. Big live crowd tonight. College football, man, best sport on the face of the earth, and we are blessed to be able to talk about it every 72 hours or so. Appreciate you guys. Take care. Have a great start to your week, and God bless.